Jonas had always enjoyed hiking through the quiet forests on the edge of his town. It was his escape from the noise of everyday life, the perfect place to clear his head and forget about the world for a while. One bright, sunny afternoon, he decided to take a different trail, one he hadn't walked in years. The path was slightly overgrown, but it still looked inviting. As he walked deeper into the woods, the familiar scent of pine trees and damp earth filled the air. Birds chirped overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It was peaceful. He felt like he was alone in the world. That was until he saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. A figure was standing near a large rock, her back turned to him. She was hunched over, her hands gently holding something between her fingers. Jonas couldn't help but notice how out of place she looked. She wasn't dressed like anyone he knew. She wore a strange, loose outfit that shimmered slightly in the sunlight, almost like fabric from another world. He hesitated, unsure whether to approach. Maybe she was a traveler, someone who had come from the nearby town, or maybe she was just another hiker like him. But something about her made him feel uneasy. The air seemed to thicken, and he could sense that she wasn't someone he could easily ignore. He decided to walk closer, hoping not to startle her. As he got closer, he noticed that she was holding a pendant in her hands. It was beautiful, unlike anything he had ever seen. The pendant was shaped like an intricate swirl, with tiny markings carved into it that seemed to glow faintly. It looked old, very old. She seemed to be trying to fix it, but her hands trembled as she fiddled with it, as though it was something very important to her. "Hey," Jonas called out softly. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't turn to face him. She seemed lost in thought, unaware of his presence. After a moment, she let out a frustrated sigh, as if whatever she was trying to do wasn't working. Jonas, still uncertain, took a step closer and spoke again. "I can help if you need it." This time she turned her head, her eyes meeting his. Her face was pale, her eyes large and bright, with a softness to them that almost seemed out of place. She didn't say anything, just stared at him as if surprised by his offer. "I'm pretty good with fixing things," Jonas added, a little awkwardly. "Maybe I can help with that pendant." She seemed to hesitate, but then nodded slowly, handing the pendant to him. Her hands were still shaking as she placed it in his palm. Jonas could feel the weight of the pendant, both physically and emotionally, as if there was a history attached to it that he couldn't understand. Jonas examined the pendant. It was delicate, with intricate carvings along its edges, but the chain was broken. He could easily fix it with a little effort. What puzzled him more, though, was the look of sorrow on the girl's face. "I'm Jonas," he said, trying to break the silence. "What's your name?" She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Ilara," she finally said, her voice soft and distant, as though she wasn't quite sure if she wanted to share her name with him. Jonas smiled at her. "Nice to meet you, Ilara. Don't worry, this won't take long." He took out a small tool from his backpack and began working on the pendant. It was delicate work, but he was used to fixing small things, and this wasn't much different. As he carefully connected the chain, he couldn't help but notice how quiet Ilara was, how distant she seemed. She wasn't crying, but her expression was full of sadness, almost as though she were lost in thought. Jonas felt a sense of responsibility for her. She was clearly struggling with something, though he didn't know what. He had never met anyone like her before. She didn't seem dangerous, but there was something about her presence that made him feel like he had to be careful. As Jonas worked, he decided to break the silence again. "So, what's the story behind this pendant?" Ilara's eyes shifted to the pendant in his hands. Her gaze softened as she looked at it, and for a moment, Jonas thought he saw something like pain flicker across her face. "It's a gift," she said quietly, "from someone important." Jonas looked up at her, his curiosity piqued. "Who gave it to you?" She bit her lip, her eyes clouding with emotion. "Someone I lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas felt the weight of her words. There was more to this pendant than he could understand. He didn't push her further, respecting her silence. He focused on the pendant instead, finishing the repair with a sense of completion. He handed it back. to her gently, his fingers brushing hers as she took it. "Here you go," he said, offering a small smile. "It's fixed." Ilara stared at the pendant for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly as she held it. For a moment, Jonas thought she might say something, but instead she simply gazed at it, her eyes distant, almost as though she were looking at something beyond the pendant. The silence hung heavy between them, and Jonas wasn't sure if he should speak or leave. But then, to his surprise, Ilara's face crumbled and her lips quivered. She let out a soft sob, and Jonas immediately stepped forward, unsure what to do. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "I didn't mean to upset you." But she shook her head, her tears falling silently. "It's not that," she whispered. "It's just ... I've been carrying this with me for so long. It's all I have left of her." Jonas froze. Her words were heavy with grief, and he realized that this pendant was far more than just a beautiful piece of jewelry. It was a connection to something or someone she had lost, and the pain of that loss was clear in her eyes. Ilara wiped her tears away quickly, as though embarrassed by her emotions. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to cry." Jonas shook his head, his heart aching. For her. "No, don't apologize. It's okay." But inside, Jonas couldn't help but wonder, what was this pendant really to her? Why did it mean so much? And why did fixing it make her cry? As Ilara stood silently, clutching the pendant, Jonas realized that their meeting was no ordinary chance encounter. He had no idea what was happening, but something told him this moment was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could understand. The forest around them felt quieter now, as though the world itself had slowed down to watch the two of them. And for the first time in a long while, Jonas had the strange feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Jonas stood there, watching Ilara as she held the pendant close to her chest. The soft sobs that had escaped her were quiet now, replaced by a strange stillness. Her face, pale and smooth, was partly hidden behind her long dark hair, but her eyes were visible, shimmering with the remnants of her tears. She didn't speak for a long time. Jonas wasn't sure if she would or if she even wanted to. He stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. The air around them seemed thick with tension. He wanted to comfort her, but he wasn't sure how. She wasn't from his world, and the emotions she was showing were so much more profound than anything he had ever experienced. Her grief was something deep, something old, something he didn't understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ilara looked up at him. Her eyes were still red, but there was a softness there, a vulnerability that made Jonas feel as if he had stepped into a world he didn't belong in. She wiped her eyes gently, her hand trembling slightly as she did so. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse but genuine. "You didn't have to do this." Jonas gave a small, uncertain smile. "It was no problem. I just fixed the chain. I didn't think it would." He stopped himself, unsure if he should finish the sentence. He didn't want to say the wrong thing. Ilara nodded slowly. She was still staring at the pendant, tracing the edges of the carvings with her fingertips as though reading something that wasn't there. It was as if the pendant itself held the answers she had been looking for, or perhaps it was the only part of her past that hadn't been lost to time and war. "I don't know how to explain it," she said quietly, finally speaking again. "This pendant ... it's the last thing I have from her." Her voice trembled again, and she quickly wiped away another tear. "From my mother." Jonas stood still, allowing her the space to share more if she wanted to. He knew that sometimes words couldn't fix things, but they could offer a kind of release. He didn't want to rush her, but his curiosity was getting the better of him. He had to know more. Who was she? He asked softly, trying to show the kind of understanding he knew would matter to her. Ilara let out a shaky breath, and for a moment Jonas thought she might not answer. But then she began to speak, her words slow but steady. "My mother," Ilara said, her gaze distant. "She was a queen, a ruler of a planet far from here. It was a beautiful world, full of light and life. But everything changed when the war came." Jonas's heart sank. He could feel the weight of her words, the depth of her loss. She wasn't just speaking about a family member, she was talking about a whole world, a way of life that had been torn apart. I remember the days. Before the war, Alara continued, her voice softening with the memory. The way the sun would set over the hills, the way the air smelled of sweet flowers and fresh rain. My mother would sit with me under the trees, telling me stories about our people, about the past, and about the future. She paused, her eyes closing for a moment as though the memory was too painful to relive. Jonas felt a deep sense of sorrow for her. He hadn't been prepared for the depth of what she was sharing, but then the invaders came, Ilara said, her voice darkening. They didn't care about the beauty of our world. They only cared about power. My mother fought for us, for her people. She gave everything to protect our planet, even her life. The last words were barely a whisper, but they hit Jonas like a punch to the gut. He felt a wave of sympathy for her, and he could see how much she had suffered. I was only a child, she continued, her voice cracking slightly. I couldn't understand why it was happening, why people had to die, why everything was falling apart. And when the war was over, I was left with nothing but this pendant. She held it up again, her fingers trembling as she clutched it tightly. Jonas watched her, his heart heavy with understanding. He didn't know what it was like to lose an entire world, to lose everything you loved in an instant. But he knew what it was like to carry grief. And from the way Alara spoke, she had carried this grief for a long time. All alone, that pendant, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. It was the only thing my mother gave me before she. Jonas didn't need her to finish the sentence. He could see the pain in her eyes, the way she was reliving her mother's death in that moment. He wanted to comfort her, but he wasn't sure how. He had never been good with emotions, and this was something far beyond anything he had ever experienced. Without thinking, Jonas stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He wasn't sure if she would pull away, but she didn't. She simply closed her eyes, her body stiffening for a moment before she relaxed under his touch. I'm sorry, Alara, Jonas said quietly. I can't imagine what you've been through, but I'm here. If you ever want to talk or if you need anything, I'll listen. For a moment, there was silence between them. The world around them seemed to fade away, and all that was left was the two of them standing together in the woods. It was a strange moment, one that Jonas didn't quite understand. But he felt something deeper than just sympathy. He felt a bond, a connection that went beyond words. Ilara slowly opened her eyes, and for the first time since Jonas had met her, she gave him a small, shaky smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Thank you, Jonas, she said softly. You've given me something today, ... Something I didn't think I would ever find again. Her eyes glistened with fresh tears, but this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. Jonas gave her a gentle nod. It's nothing. I'm glad I could help. Ilara reached out and touched his hand lightly, her fingers brushing against his. It was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot. She was starting to heal, little by little, and perhaps that was all that mattered. As they stood there, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest. The trees seemed to whisper in the wind, as if acknowledging the bond that had just been formed. Jonas didn't know where this unexpected encounter would lead, but he felt a strange certainty that this moment was just the beginning of something bigger, something important. And as Ilara turned to leave, her pendant now securely around her neck, Jonas followed her into the unknown, knowing that whatever happened next, he would be there for her, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next few days passed in a blur for Jonas. After his chance encounter with Ilara, life seemed to slow down, and the world around him seemed a little quieter. He found himself thinking about her, often about the sadness in her eyes, the pain she had carried with her for so long. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her delicate hands holding the pendant, her face filled with grief, and the way she had quietly broken down in front of him. Jonas had always been someone who kept to himself, but something about Ilara made him feel as though he needed to understand her better. Her story, her loss, it was so much more than just a piece of jewelry or a simple tragedy. He felt a strange pull toward her, as if their paths had crossed for a reason. But he knew that to understand her, he needed to know more. So, a few days after their first meeting, Jonas decided to visit the spot in the woods where he had first found her. He didn't know why he was going back. Maybe it was because he needed closure, or maybe it was because he couldn't get her out of his mind. But as he made his way to the forest, a sense of calm washed over him. It was almost as if the trees themselves were guiding him, pulling him toward something important. When he arrived at the spot, it was as peaceful as he remembered. The sun filtered through the canopy of leaves, casting long shadows on the ground. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jonas sat down on the same rock where he had first seen Alara, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He didn't know what he was expecting. Perhaps she would appear again, or perhaps he would find some clue that would explain more about her past. But as the minutes stretched into hours, he began to feel foolish. He had no idea what he was looking for. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a rustling in the bush. Jonas turned, his heart pounding in his chest. Out of the shadows emerged Alara, her dark eyes scanning the area, her hair flowing in the wind. She looked more composed than she had the last time he saw her, but there was still a quiet sadness about her. She didn't say anything at first, but simply walked over and sat beside him. For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest, the birds, the breeze, the distant rustling of the leaves. It was peaceful, but there was an unspoken tension between them. Jonas could feel it, and he knew she could, too. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Jonas said, his voice breaking the silence. Alara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure I should," she said softly. Jonas nodded. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I want to understand. I want to know more about you, about what you've been through." Alara's eyes softened, and for a moment Jonas thought she might pull away. But instead she sighed as though she had made a decision. "My story isn't an easy one to share," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a story of loss, of sacrifice, of a world that no longer exists, but maybe it's time you knew the truth." Jonas waited, his heart racing with anticipation. He didn't know what she was going to say, but he felt that whatever it was, it would change everything. Alara looked down at the pendant, her fingers gently tracing the carvings again. "This pendant," she began, "was made by the people of my world. It's not just a piece of jewelry, it's a symbol of our history, our culture, our survival. It's the key to understanding who we were ... and who I am now." Jonas listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. He could see how much the pendant meant to her, how deeply it was tied to her identity. But he had no idea just how important it really was. "I come from a planet called Ceres, a place unlike anything you could imagine," Alara continued. "It was a world of beauty, peace, and knowledge. We were a highly advanced civilization, and our people were known for our wisdom and our ability to connect with the universe. We didn't just live on our planet, we were part of it. Everything we did, every decision we made, was in harmony with the natural world." Jonas's eyes widened as he listened. He had never heard of a world like Ceres, a place where people lived in such harmony with nature. It sounded almost too perfect to be real, but Alara's voice faltered. "We were not prepared for what came next." She paused, her eyes staring far off into the distance as though seeing something Jonas couldn't. "A race of invaders came. They were ruthless, with no regard for life or the environment. They came from another galaxy, seeking to conquer and destroy. Our world was defenseless against them." Jonas could feel the weight of her words. It was hard to imagine the beauty of her world being overrun by an enemy like that. "We fought back," Alara said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "But we were outmatched. We weren't warriors, we were philosophers, healers, and scientists. Our strength was in knowledge, not in battle. We didn't know how to fight a war." Alara closed her eyes as though remembering the horror of it all. Jonas could feel her pain, and he didn't know what to say. He simply reached out, placing a hand gently on her arm. "She didn't pull away. My mother, Queen Lere, she was the heart of our world. She led us with wisdom and compassion. She was the one who believed that if we could survive this war, We could rebuild our civilization stronger than ever, but she didn't survive. Ilara's voice broke, and a single tear slid down her cheek. Jonas felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for her to lose everything: her family, her home, her entire way of life. My mother gave me this pendant just before the final battle. It was her last gift to me. She said it would carry her spirit, her strength, and her love, no matter where I went. And when I left Siraz in the aftermath of the war, I carried this pendant with me, hoping it would remind me of who I was, of what we had been. Jonas listened in silence, understanding now why the pendant meant so much to her. It wasn't just a memory, it was her link to everything she had lost, to a world that no longer existed. The war destroyed everything, Ilara said, her voice quiet but steady. The invaders left nothing behind. They took our cities, our knowledge, our history, and I was the last of my people. Jonas could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of that loss. He could only imagine how heavy it must be to carry such grief. I didn't know where to go after that, Ilara continued. So I wandered. I searched for someone who could help me understand. And then I found Earth. It was different, but it was also a place where I could begin again. And now I've met you. Jonas's heart swelled with a mixture of sadness and admiration. He had never met someone like Ilara, someone who had been through so much and yet still had the strength to move forward, to survive. I don't know what the future holds, Ilara said, her voice full of uncertainty. But I want to find a way to rebuild, to honor my people's memory. And maybe I can find a new purpose here. Jonas looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let Ilara face it alone. The days following their conversation were filled with quiet moments of reflection. Jonas couldn't stop thinking about what Ilara had shared with him. Her story, the loss of her world, and the deep pain she had carried with her, it was all so much for anyone to bear. Yet here she was, sitting beside him, still trying to find a way forward. Jonas felt a growing sense of admiration for her. Despite everything she had lost, she had not given up. She was still searching, still holding on to a glimmer of hope. It made him wonder what kind of strength lay hidden in the hearts of others, strength he had never known existed. Over the next few weeks, Jonas spent more time with Ilara. They would meet at the same spot in the forest, sitting on the large rock where they had first talked. Sometimes they would talk about their lives, other times they would sit in comfortable silence. It was as if they both understood that some things didn't need words to be understood. Ilara had begun to open up more, slowly, piece by piece. She still spoke little about her past, but Jonas could sense that she was starting to trust him. And that trust, fragile as it was something he didn't take lightly. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low on the horizon, Jonas sat waiting for Ilara. He had brought a small picnic, some sandwiches, and a flask of tea he had made that morning. He wasn't much of a cook, but he thought it would be a nice gesture. Maybe, just maybe, it would show her that he cared. When Ilara appeared, her soft footsteps rustling through the leaves, Jonas stood and smiled. "I thought we could have lunch today," he said, holding up the basket. "I brought some food. I hope you like it." She gave him a surprised but warm smile. "That's very kind of you," she said, sitting down next to him. She looked at the food and then at Jonas, her eyes softening. "I don't think anyone's ever done something like this for me before." Jonas's heart skipped a beat at her words. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, so grateful for a simple gesture. It made him realize just how little people took the time to care for others. And it was in moments like this, in the quiet exchanges and the unspoken understanding, that he realized how much he wanted to be there for her. They sat and ate together, talking about trivial things at first. The weather, the forest, the little oddities of life that made up the small moments they shared. Jonas couldn't help but notice how much lighter Ilara seemed today. There was still sadness in her eyes, but it was more distant now, as if it had been pushed back just a little further. As they finished eating, Jonas finally asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back to Siraz?" He wasn't sure if it was the right question to ask, But it had been on his mind for a while. Ilara's gaze shifted toward the horizon, her eyes narrowing slightly as she stared at the setting sun. "I don't know," she said softly. "Part of me wants to. I want to see it again, even if it's just in my memories. But another part of me knows that it's gone. It's lost. My home. It's not the same anymore." Jonas watched her closely. He could tell how much the idea of returning hurt her. It wasn't just a matter of going back, it was about the loss of everything she had known, everything that had once made her world so beautiful. "I think ... Ilara continued, her voice catching slightly. "I think I'll have to move on. I can't keep living in the past. I can't keep holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." Jonas nodded, understanding more than she knew. He had never lost something as big as a planet, but he knew what it was like to lose people, to feel as though the world around you had changed in a way you couldn't fix. Sometimes you had to let go, even when it seemed impossible. Jonas said slowly, "I don't have the answers, but I do know that you don't have to do this alone. Whatever you decide, whatever comes next, you don't have to carry it all by yourself." Ilara turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But when she saw none, she gave a soft sigh and smiled faintly. "I know," she said, her voice quiet but full of meaning. I think I'm starting to realize that." They sat in silence again, but it was a comfortable silence, one that felt like a shared understanding, a bond forming between them. Jonas didn't know what the future held for them. He didn't even know what tomorrow would bring. But in that moment, he knew that he would be there for Ilara, no matter what happened. The days turned into weeks, and Jonas and Ilara grew closer. They shared more of their lives with each other, each conversation deepening their connection. Ilara told him about her past, about her people, their way of life, and the beauty of her world before the war. Jonas, in turn, shared stories about his childhood, about growing up in a small town, and about his dreams for the future. One evening, as they sat on the rock watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jonas spoke again. "You said before that you wanted to rebuild, to honor your people's memory. Have you thought about what that might look like?" Ilara was quiet for a moment before she answered. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe it's just a dream, something too big for me to do alone. But ... I want to make sure that Sira's isn't forgotten. I want to keep their memory alive, even if it's just through small things. I want to find a way to honor what we stood for." Jonas thought about her words for a long moment. He could see the determination in her eyes, the quiet strength that had carried her through so much. And he knew, deep down, that she wasn't just speaking about Sira's anymore, she was speaking about herself. She was ready to rebuild, to start anew, to find her place in a world that had been turned upside down. "Well," Jonas said, his voice soft but filled with conviction, "maybe it's not about rebuilding it all at once. Maybe it's about starting small. Maybe it's about finding a purpose that feels right to you." Ilara turned to look at him, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "Do you think so?" Jonas smiled, giving her an encouraging nod. "I do. You're not alone. Anymore, Ilara. You don't have to do everything at once. But whatever it is, I'll be here to help. One step at a time." For the first time in a long while, Ilara allowed herself to believe in that possibility. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward. And with Jonas by her side, she knew that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for her yet. Jonas woke early the next morning, the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees. It had become a routine for him now to meet Ilara at the same spot in the forest every day. There was something about the quiet mornings, the calm before the world fully awakened, that made their conversations more meaningful. It was as though they were in their own little world, a world untouched by the chaos and noise outside the forest. Today, however, felt different. Jonas could sense it. There was a change in the air, something that made the morning feel heavier, more significant. Ilara hadn't said much the previous evening, but he had noticed a shift in her. She seemed more determined, her eyes sharper. as if she had made a decision that she was ready to share. As he reached the spot where they usually met, he saw Alara already sitting on the large rock. She was staring into the distance, her fingers lightly tracing the pendant that hung around her neck. She looked peaceful, but there was a certain tension in her posture that Jonas couldn't ignore. "Good morning," Jonas greeted her, walking closer. Alara turned her head slightly and smiled, but it wasn't the same soft, uncertain smile she had given him before. This one was different. It was more assured, as if she had found a quiet strength within herself. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steady, almost like she had something important to say. Jonas sat beside her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for the next words to be spoken. Jonas could feel the weight of the silence, but he didn't want to break it. He knew that Alara would speak when she was ready. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Alara turned to face him fully. Her expression was serious, her eyes focused. "Jonas," she began, her voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about starting small, about finding a purpose." Jonas nodded, listening carefully. He had always believed that small steps were the key to progress, that it wasn't about the grand gestures, but about the little things that added up over time. He had said it to Alara before, but now it seemed that she was starting to understand it in her own way. I think I've been looking for something," Alara continued, her voice softening slightly. "For so long, I've been searching for a way to make everything I lost mean something. I thought I needed to rebuild Syrah's, to restore everything that was taken, but I've realized that maybe that's not what I need." Jonas tilted his head, not fully understanding what she meant. "What do you mean?" Alara took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the pendant. "I've been holding on to the past for so long, thinking that if I could just recreate what we had, everything would be okay. But the truth is Syrah's is gone. It's never coming back. And I can't keep living in the shadow of what was." Jonas listened closely, his heart going out to her. He knew how hard it was to let go of the past, to move on from something that had defined you. But what Alara was saying wasn't about forgetting, it was about acceptance. It was about understanding that some things, no matter how much you want them, can never be restored. "So what are you going to do?" Jonas asked quietly, his voice gentle. Alara smiled, a real smile, this time one that reached her eyes. "I'm going to create something new. Something that honors the memory of Syrah's without trying to bring it back. I've spent too much time looking at the past. It's time to look to the future." Jonas felt a warmth spread through him at her words. There was a strength in them, a hope that he hadn't heard in her voice before. She was finally ready to move forward, to embrace the future, and to stop living in the shadow of her lost home. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet," Alara admitted, her voice softer now. "But I know that I don't want to do it alone. I want to do it with you." Jonas's heart skipped a beat at her words. He hadn't expected that. For a moment he was speechless, not knowing how to respond. He had always been there for her, supporting her in whatever way he could, but hearing her say that she wanted to continue their journey together felt like something much bigger. It felt like a bond, something deeper than just friendship. "I don't know what I can offer," Jonas said honestly. "I'm just a guy from Earth. I've never been through what you've been through. But I promise you, Alara, I'll be here. Whatever you need, I'll help you. I'll walk with you every step of the way." Alara reached out, her hand gently brushing his. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more, something that Jonas couldn't quite name, but that made his heart race. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much that means to me." They sat together in silence for a while, the quiet of the forest surrounding them. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy or uncomfortable. It was a peaceful kind of silence, one that spoke volumes without needing words. They didn't need to say anything else. In that moment, they both understood. They understood that they were no longer two strangers in a strange land. They were two people who had found each other and who would help each other heal. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the trees, Jonas and Alara stood together, ready to face whatever came next. They didn't know what the future held, but they didn't need to. Together, they were ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. And that in itself was enough.